graduated, elevated. Now it's my time to shine, yeah, let's go. Major moves, power moves, take it to the top one time, non-stop.
In terms of mud huts, or do we build mud huts because obviously they're safer, it's cooler, or do we go for modern housing? Because I think you mentioned as well that there's certain indigenous places where there is no roads to get to those certain areas. So I'm trying to understand in terms of how do we manage this problem to make it better. Like you said, I've gone into this community. I don't want to just be a researcher and research and walk away. What does that look like in terms of current situation and future? What are the plans?
So we formed an advocacy group as students that were working in that community. We called ourselves the change makers because we think the first instance should be policy. Because policy, remember when civilization and modernity came, we were told everything black was barbaric, everything white was superior. But no one had discovered these other effects of going deep into the climate things, the economy things. And now that the white people are discovering this, they are able to build mud houses because they can get an architect, they can certify their buildings, they can get a grader, they can build themselves roads. So it basically means it's epistemic injustice, because if you have the financial muscle, you can still have a house and a modern house and whatever that you want. But people that don't have anything are living in shacks. And as we always see in South Africa, either they catch fire or it's just a shameful situation. They don't have toilets. But if you allow people to build these houses and first start by changing policy, number one. Number two, it's a difficult one because it also speaks to land distribution, because you cannot build a mud house if you don't have land. The process in itself is long, and you invest in this building structure. So you can have to own the land to build in that structure. So without people getting their land, and the land politics is a debate that we need to have, because if you want to see poverty escalate, is to give land to a certain few people, a certain extent. And as we are seeing right now in South Africa, the economy is not in favor of the masses. And even the political climate is showing, because when you look at, for the first time, the ruling party has had less votes than Noma, because people are starting to see that it's been a while and we haven't seen the results that we're seeing. But we are saying, stop looking at the ruling party. Let us look at what can we do as young people to advocate for these law reforms, to advocate for these villages, to at least have a larger viewing, a larger audience. And what is the role of academia then, if we're not going to say in our architecture class, students, there's these kinds of buildings? Why are we only teaching certain kinds of buildings when there's different kinds of buildings? So that is why I said I recommended, and I said I loved that my university exposes architecture students to come to these villages to learn that besides a modern house, there's other ways of building, but it's just not enough. After the students have learned, they go look for jobs and they still build modern houses and they forget what happened behind. So those few students that took on the project were saying, we really need to find other academics to do research. That's where your science comes in. Do your research, prove that these houses are cool, prove that these houses have been long-standing, and prove that academia have a role to play in society to solve currently pressing issues. Because why are we silent as sociologists? When societal issues are here, if we are saying there's no road, but these students that are living in these areas where there's no roads are still your students. You are still the people that you are teaching. And if you are publishing, why are you not publishing from your research? Because your teaching and learning and research should hold the same foundations in a curricula. So why are we prioritizing teaching, research, and not community engagement? It's because we're not willing to be politically correct in dealing with issues that affect our societies as academics. We can write books, we can write theses and put them in the library. These books that we write about the same communities that we say we're serving, but what are the solutions? And we're saying we're taking out students that must be solution driven. What are the skills that are coming out of this? So for me, my curiosity was tweaked in a way as a lecturer in terms of when I go into a class and I develop a course material. Now I think differently because I'm saying to myself, what am I saying to my students that will let them think about being active citizens in society? They mustn't be like myself because I'm also a repenting student, because when I went to school, I just wanted to have money to bring my family out of poverty. But now it's not just about my family.
Which goes back to your saying, Ubuntu amante.
Exactly.
See, I'm becoming a pro. The pronunciation has even developed.
Come be a guest speaker.
That's it. So the next point is, in terms of land ownership, and I understand that this is sensitive. So, I spoke to somebody, his research was looking at, what was the terminology that he used? Did he call them? I think he called them shanty houses, the ones that are in urban areas. Yeah. So in your opinion, do you think we need to relocate the people who are staying in those homes to such areas so that they can build on the land in those communities? Or do you think the government needs to issue out land, let's say, we'll say Johannesburg, for example. Do you think it should go that way, or they should be returned in terms of the villages, because businesses can boom there, in terms of agriculture and manufacturing, etc., because of the space? Or what are your thoughts in terms of that?
I think land distribution should be our first fight, but unfortunately, we're not fighting it in a united way, because if land was distributed equally amongst the families that don't have land, we would not be having those shacks. The reason why I'm building a shack is because it's not my land. So if the wind comes and blows this shack, I'm in trouble, yes. But if the government comes and says, we're moving, you want to build a mall here, they will demolish just boxes and shacks. But if they have to demolish a whole concrete structure, that's deep, because remember, when you build that structure, it's emotion, it's the community, it's building relationships. So it will take a while for government to demolish such structures if people are united. So the only way that we can force the government to give us the land is for us to be united and come up with a plan that is going to solve these problems. But now what happens is that because people are working in towns and they are from the villages, transport is scarce and it's expensive, and they just lodge anyway, and they create a space for them to live. So they are constantly just moving. So I really think that we need to look at it holistically. It's just not a one-way answer thing, but I know for sure that if you take away the land from an African, already that's shameful enough, because we eat from the land, we do our cultural practices from the land, and our cultures and traditions. You want to have a home for you to raise your families. And this is how we break up families. Because if you have a father that's living in a shack somewhere there and the whole family is still living in a village, we are desperately bringing upon families that are distracted and children that don't have fathers that are constantly at home. So how is that system different from the apartheid system that we had, where Black people were separated and families were not growing?
No, I know I mentioned, the research for, his name is Elmond Bandiko, and he looks at, those communities whereby they've built the shacks. And what his argument was, to me is that those are communities and that no one has a right to destroy those communities. And my argument back to him was they have no sewage system, they have no running water. So why can't they stay in villages? And his argument back was there's no jobs, there's no future for the family. So they're going to the urban areas, but the government is not really looking after its people, essentially. Would you side with his argument towards me, or would you say there's more to it in terms of nuances?
It's a very nuanced discussion, and both of you guys have a point, because honestly speaking, the job situation in South Africa is not good. If I am a PhD holder and I'm sitting here 7 months later without a job, what are we saying about the person that doesn't even have a matric? Number one. So obviously those people are going to be displaced. And now there's another nuance where you find that a new construction is coming into town. And because they know they don't want their workers to be late, they don't want their workers to not come because their child is sick at home, they literally give them and finance them. That's capitalism, and finance them to literally build this illegal structures where they're building the mall so that they can gain from these employees being constantly there all the time. So these trends are changing in favor of capitalism all the time. And one of the key things that my brother said when I was failing to get a job abroad in the Netherlands, he said, maybe that's a sign for you to come back to the community and do the work there, because we've always thought abroad was better, white was better. But what about you now re-looking at the way that you can teach? Because I was wanting a job in academia and I'm not getting it. And he's like, but you can still teach out of academia. But because that's not the way our education structure has taught us, that I can't define myself outside of the academic structure. I don't want to be just a Busisiwe. I want to be a Busisiwe from the University of the Johannesburg. I want to be Busisiwe from a certain community. Now I'm feeling displaced because I'm just Busisiwe. I'm not attached to any community. I'm not even married, because that's the other thing about Black societies. At least if you're a Busisiwe, that was someone else's wife or a mother of someone. I just feel naked, because all the time it's like, when are you getting married? When are you having a child? When are you getting employed? What are you doing now? You know, so we are constantly catching up. We are constantly catching up. And that's what depresses us the most, because half the time they're chasing after something. You can't say, oh, 8 years I've gotten this PhD. Already society is saying, what's next? What are you doing with your life? What are you doing for your community? You know, so these nuances are a lot, but the reason why we are not winning is because the person that's working on land issues is not collaborating with the person that's working on community engagement issues. Because if we're working interdisciplinary together, I'm telling you, there's no way these brilliant minds cannot co-create and find out, pioneer new projects, pioneer new things. We still want to do things the way that we've always done them. Then what is this education? What are we discovering? New science and new knowledge. We still do. We're still quoting people that were dead 100 years ago. And we're not coming up with new ideas. How are we going to come up with new ideas if we're not thinking out of the box? And if we're not involving those people in those communities? Like you were saying that a desktop research is different. I did a desktop research for my master's in human rights law. I struggled in my PhD because that is why I spent 8 years, because I didn't have to deal with these nuances. And academics, unfortunately, they don't like to do community engagement work because it's hard. You have to face your own bias. You have to get out of your comfort zone. And you have to discover things about your discipline that you were taught that are not necessarily true, unfortunately.
I think it's quite tough, because even with law, we always go in 1945, it was set president. You know, to your point with education or with human rights, because we always go back to what set precedent, but the world is moving at such a pace that we can't keep up in terms of AI, and the law itself can't keep up with AI, because what is the governance on AI? I think we're still all trying to figure it out. What is the governance on social media? We're still trying to figure it out. But they collect so much data on you and I. I'm sure they could tell me and you about our lives a bit better.
About our lives.
Than we
Exactly.
actually know. So, it takes me to the next point, something that you said, which is quite critical. Why do we think white is better? Because I think that's an interesting statement that your brother said to you. Why do we think that?
It goes back to that student movement I was telling you about earlier on, the Fees Must Fall movement, and they started a movement on decolonization to say that we really need to look at all these colonial things that we're taught that they are at the top of the hierarchy, and the standard Black women are always at the bottom of the barrel. They're the most disrespected. They're the most hardworking, though. And then white is always just on top. And we've never questioned. So now that our generation is starting to question this curriculum, starting to question, also we're taught not to talk back to our parents, not to ask them what they mean when they say this, not to actually ask about the things that we're taught. So we just took it and ran with it. And now it's interesting that now that we're finding that this education is getting us to think critically, we're now thinking, actually, what was Steve Biko saying when he said, Black men, you're on your own? And you're like, oh, this man was onto something. But why was he killed if he was onto something? So these are the things that take us back to our leaders. They take us back to seeing that we were really fed lies and our histories were sanitized to think that white is better, because if white is better, no one would suppress the white people. If you know your tops, you don't care about the underdogs. If white was better, no one would be suppressing Black people the way that they do. Because why would you care about these people if they're nothing? They are not a threat to you. So I think we really need to decolonize the way we see ourselves, and the way that we see the next person, the way that we treat each other, and the way that we think about problem solving. Because if we really would unite in terms of trying to find and co-create solutions together with the communities instead of sitting in ivory towers, I think we'd stand a better chance of answering that question, why we think white is the standard. We were taught that white is the standard, and we were young, we were ignorant, that was fine. But to have a PhD and still think white is standard, then it means there's something wrong with our education system. To have all these Black heroes and leaders that have actually done so much and still think that white is standard. So there are Black role models. There are people that still did the work that we refuse to quote in our curriculums, in our books, in our daily lived experiences.
Do you think it's refusal or it's lack of knowledge? Because one thing about PhD Hard Talk, it is about the dissemination of knowledge. But if you don't really look for the knowledge, then you don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I think ignorance is bliss. Because if you don't know, then you just don't know. And most people don't want to know. I mean, this society has so much information on their table, but we're the ones that don't know that the most. Why is it that I must educate a white person about myself while I know so much about them? So ignorance is bliss. People just choose to sit in their ignorance, and you go into a conference and people will tell you that you walk in the street and there's lions and you are supposed to educate them. And you're thinking they don't know that we really don't come across a lion in my 40 years of life. If I want to see a lion, I don't just have to walk outside and meet a lion.
That's quite it's thought-provoking. So then the question I have is, in your opinion, just as you've touched on conferences there, do you think we need to decolonize our education system completely? Like you said, they are Black heroes. Like, for example, for Black History Month, what they taught us in school was that a Black person came up with a comb. I didn't know that. So that was quite interesting. They come up with the brush for sweeping, the Hoover, you know, like they were contributors towards all of this, but it's stuff that we wouldn't know until Black History Month came. That's when we learn about our Black heroes, essentially. And it's only a month. I mean, it's just October in the UK. Then after that, it's, you know, it's back to other things, in terms of mental health, etc. Not to take away from that, please don't come for me. So the question I have is, do you think we need to decolonize the education system from start all the way to postgrad, or do you think it's just in higher education where people are more mature, maybe? That's when maybe they'll receive a bit better. What are your thoughts in terms of that?
Most of the stuff that I remember about my history class are in primary school. That Jan van Riebeck discovered Cape Town. Now that I'm in post my school days, I'm asking myself, did he really discover Cape Town where there were people living in Cape Town? You know, because now I have my critical skills, but I still know. We used to know who did this, who discovered this, who conquered who. So honestly speaking, the younger the better, because it's really embarrassing, this thing of always and constantly being teaching people. And then on top of that, they ask you, why do you speak such good English? I didn't know that you could speak English. And then you ask yourself, actually, why am I speaking good English? I don't want to speak good English. And then when you give them the response that, oh, yes, because we were colonized by the English. I speak good English because it's a traumatic response of the colonization. And then people blush and turn pink. So why were you expecting me to, what answer were you expecting from me, you know? So it's always then that issue of saying, yo, you become an angry Black woman because you are constantly going to be answering these ridiculous questions of why you speak good English. Why am I not speaking good Tswana, like you were saying, that someone from Botswana said you are not pronouncing your name wrong, right? You know, it's because of this colonization that happened. And then you get to the Netherlands and you're like, oh, actually, it's not just the English that colonized us. The Dutch did, and these two fought together because they're like, why don't you speak Afrikaans? Afrikaans is a South African language. And then you have to tell them, no, you forced us to speak Afrikaans. Even though it was not your language. You made it yours, you stole it and made us speak it. And then now it's like you are there to cause trouble and people don't know their history. So who's supposed to be teaching this history if we're not changing the curriculums? We should know that because in the way that we were taught, these people were heroes because they discovered Cape Town. It's only now that we know that they were colonizers. They stole Cape Town. But I can't teach like that at a university. I'd be fired unless we change the curriculum. If I came there and be like, yeah, white people stole Cape Town, I'd be fired.